Hello, my name is Matt Cornock and I attended the OEB conference in Berlin between the 3rd and the 5th of December 2025. This is a report back from one of the sessions that I attended led by Oliver Nahm at the European Association for Distance Learning morning workshop that took place on the 3rd of December. And I really wanted to share the discussion that took place in that workshop with you. Let me share my notes, and you can see here there's a lot of different ideas, and obviously this was a representation from all the different contributions in the room. So thank you to everyone who shared their ideas throughout the discussions that took place. And what I wanted to focus on here were just three aspects that really stood out to me. So this first part of the discussion was about the role of artificial intelligence, in particular generative artificial intelligence, in education and how that changes the nature of education. And there were lots of questions here about, for example, exams and what actually happens with education when artificial intelligence plays a part. So just zooming in here, how should exams change in a world of AI? And one of the conclusions that came from the discussion was that open assessment will disappear. Now, I personally don't believe that will be the case. There was a lot of discussion about sort of retrenching back to handwritten exams, but then Oliver Nahm shared a wonderful illustration of why this isn't actually going to solve the problem anyway. Given the case of someone wearing AI specs, able to get the answers into their glasses for their handwritten exam, but also an example where someone's just copy and pasted from generative AI output and submitted that as handwritten, including the typical Gen AI starter to posts when you see their responses. So there's ways that just having handwritten isn't going to solve all of our problems here. So we're thinking about, well, what could this actually mean? For example, could we change exams to be a verbal defence to test knowledge? Or perhaps this might even raise the level of education, requiring higher quality responses rather than just the repetition of knowledge. So there's some conflicting ideas here about where AI and examinations could come in. There is also something here about the role of AI to help with marking, for example, reducing the marking load by allowing AI to perform that analysis against perhaps a rubric with processing of handwritten notes. Now, again, we're into a situation where we could end up with AI generative exam responses being marked by AI markers, and it just becomes a strange loop of who's actually learning in this form of education. There's also something here about that if you're using AI, the cost of education goes down. And again, it's not necessarily an idea that I adhere to. I think there are lots of benefits of using AI. There are efficiencies that can be gained using AI. But the actual process of learning may or may not go down as AI is being used. And particularly as we move into something like the idea of, well, maybe AI gives us opportunity to spend more time in small groups, but then there's a scale here, a scale issue. You can't have everyone being taught one-to-one or in small groups, particularly in the mass sort of scale of higher education that we're used to. So does that change the nature of education from being mass scale to being more small group? And a lot of the time that we would have been spending doing some jobs can be reallocated towards that small group and small interaction. So there's some interesting ideas there, but quite complicated and conflicting in some cases. I think what I can really sum it up to is AI acceptance is not black and white, and certainly in my own head I'm struggling to hold the positives of AI against the negatives and the constraints of AI, and essentially you have to hold both in your head. It's not a case of it's like you're either for or against. You have to be aware of both the benefits and the constraints of the use of AI and its interplay in education. And they do conflict, and that's quite a cognitive dissonance, I suppose, in terms of how we need to think about the use of AI in education. So just looking at a few of the notes here, there is something here about making sure that if you are using AI, perhaps this is a competency that needs to be baked into education in the future, knowing when to use it and when not to use it, and making sure that if you are designing in the use of AI purposefully into your teaching, then how do you encourage students to take a break from it and explain where it is useful and where maybe you could try something without it, for example? One of the comments that Oliver Nahm said is that AI gives us an opportunity to reevaluate our society, potentially in a constructive way. That's quite a powerful statement when you think it goes beyond education. It goes really into the nature of who we are as a society and how we use AI and how we think about education and how we actually deal with knowledge as well. I mean, there were some interesting comments about you can't teach knowledge, but what does that mean? I'm not quite sure. I have to admit to that. So there's a few different points here about the way that AI may influence education. The next theme I want to touch upon really is following on from that. What is the purpose of education? And that was quite a big question that we started to look at in our different groups. What is the purpose of education? Is it there to absorb knowledge? Well, of course it's not. We're talking about education as a means for us to apply our learning, to tackle challenges, and actually to think about all these different aspects of education here. A lot of language that came up was about knowledge, but actually when we talked about that, it's about moving from knowledge to perhaps thinking about skills. So certainly find your way to knowledge, and AI can help you find your way to knowledge, but then you need to apply it. Education, perhaps the purpose of education is not about knowledge, but about the development of future skills needs. And this goes back to one of the points over here on this fixed approach to education versus actually bringing more variety in education to accommodate a variety of learners. So acknowledging that there may be language barriers, maybe there's time barriers, maybe there's just different ways that different students will learn and understand, interpret and apply their knowledge. And actually AI gives us a way of dealing with that. So I think, there is something here about the purpose of knowledge. The access to all resources are already online. So why are we spending so much time trying to access and learn knowledge when actually what we really do need to be looking at is our interrogation of that knowledge, our application of that knowledge, critique of that knowledge in order to apply it. And there's some quite serious skills that need to be developed there to bring that critical perspective on knowledge as part of the educational process. So if the purpose of education then is not about knowledge but how we use it, it also touches very nicely on, again, something that Oliver said, knowing your own purpose. And whether that's you as a student, you as an educator, or you as a professional services member of staff supporting education, what's your purpose in education? And how does that connect to the actual purpose of education as it is now, as opposed to as it was 100 years ago? The final point up here is about the value of education, and it ties into the purpose, but the value of education for those who are part of that journey, part of that learning journey. And that leads us very nicely on to my final area I wanted to discuss, which is really looking at here the ideas of people. And I know this may sound like an obvious point, but education is about people. Learning can only take place by people. That could be debated now in the age of AI, but the value of education and the purpose of education is about people. So just looking here again at that purpose of education, here are some of the words that came up. Soft skills, ability to communicate, social learning, connection to the workplace and organisational learning as well. And one discussion about exchange programs, is that about learning knowledge, or is it actually about learning the culture and being able to adapt to different cultures and situate that learning and knowledge in different places? So there are many different areas of education here, but there's something very common about the people aspect of education. And when we looked at the value of education, if everything is online, everything is available to you, why would you do a course? And it's one of the questions we have over here. Is there actually a space for online? Well, of course there is, because it's about connecting people. This is one of the reasons why we still have online courses, and one of the reasons why I champion online courses. It's as a way for people to come together. It's a way for activity, learning activity. It's not about transferring knowledge. It's about using that through a process of learning with people, without people, but ultimately it's about connection. and this human connection and an emotional aspect of life, which is why social learning in the online learning space has been so popular as a sort of a underlying principle. And it was also referred to, if we go back to some Bloom's taxonomies there, going from that sort of cognitive to psychomotor, but also to that affective domain. And that affective domain seems to be coming more strongly now when we think about the role of knowledge and online spaces. So human interaction is really what may come out of all of this when AI is dominant in education. We cannot lose sight of the fact that education is a human process, as a human system at least. And one of the reasons why we're all together and we're working on education is about that understanding of different people and how knowledge is applied in different ways and how we can further ourselves. So quite aspirational, I suppose, and maybe that's where there's this shift between sort of thinking of AI in quite a technical sense and then embedding it within an applied context of education. So it's a really exciting and enjoyable session. It's the first time I've really had a really hands-on experience with AI, working with colleagues and coming up with an AI bot and thinking about sort of how it can and can't be used to support learning. But this discussion really just captured some of the nice ideas about what AI can hold, some of the challenges, but also thinking very deeply about, well, in an age of AI, where do we go next with education?